and hand over to Alice for a few introductory words.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. I'm Alice Vadreau. I'm the principal investigator of the Maripol Data Project. And I would like to welcome you all to this seminar. I'm very happy to have Professor Dr. Anna-Katharina Hornidge as a guest today, because I think it's been a while that we invited you, because we are very interested in your work. And I presented Maripol Data very early on, I think in 2019 in Piran. So this is also like 3 years ago, but I really appreciate the research you do and the work you have done that also inspired our day-to-day work to understand marine biodiversity monitoring practices and negotiations. So I'm also very happy that today is the first time that the Ocean Seminar of Maripol Data is integrated into the lecture series of the Department of Political Science of the University of Vienna. So this is an opportunity also to go beyond the ocean community that we have been addressing in the past lecture series. And the fact that we are recording this session is also something that is useful to share what has been said today with people that are interested in this specific session. Having said that, I will hand over to Ina. She will introduce our guest and also our discussant, and I look very much forward to today's debate.
Yes, thank you very much, and welcome also from my side, and welcome to a few new people that will be joining in today as well for the first time. So for those new, the Maripol Data Ocean Seminars are basically a space where we provide a discussion space for ocean topics between researchers, but also people from governments or NGOs and everybody interested in these topics. And obviously this topic today is particularly interesting for our team because we just finalized the case study fieldwork at the different countries, France, Brazil, and the United States, to understand the scientific practices and also the marine biodiversity monitoring practices and policies in these different contexts. So we had Dr. Christelle Vanot, who is a postdoctoral researcher, and also today our discussant after the session, who was in France at Ifremer, undertaking the ethnography there. We have the PhD student Anna Langlet, who was in Sao Paulo at the university in Carlos Hornidge's lab, and I also was in the United States at Lisa Levin's lab at Scripps Institution for Oceanography. And we also may have some people in the audience that may be interested or already have some experience on research vessels, or are maybe also part of this production of scientific facts and scientific knowledge. One of the out-of-office replies that we got for when we sent out this invitation for today was, "I'm out of office, I'm at sea." So if you are joining in from a research vessel, of course, please join the discussion later on as well and share your experiences in this regard. Thank you also for providing the readings in advance, which already gave some insights into these spaces, and for those of us who haven't had the opportunity to be on a vessel yet, to get some insights into these dynamics. And with this, I would like to introduce to you our presenter for today. We're very happy to have invited Professor Dr. Anna-Katharina Hornidge, who is the director of the German Institute of Development and Sustainability and professor for global sustainable development at the University of Bonn. She holds a habilitation in development research from the University of Bonn, a PhD in sociology from the Technical University of Berlin and the National University of Singapore, and a master's degree in Southeast Asian Studies from the University of Bonn. And before joining the German Institute of Development and Sustainability in March 2020, she was Professor of Social Sciences in the Marine Tropics at the University of Bremen and Head of Department of Social Sciences and of the research group Development and Knowledge Sociology at the Leibniz Center for Tropical Marine Research. From 2006 to 2015, she worked as senior researcher for the Center for Development Research. And in her research, Mrs. Hornidge focuses on the role of different types of knowledge in and for processes of change, as well as on questions of natural resources governance in agricultural and marine contexts. Her regional focus lies on Southeast and Central Asia, West and East Africa. Further, she serves as expert advisor in several advisory boards at national, EU and UN level. As member of the German Advisory Council on Global Change of the German government, co-chair of the Sustainable Development Solutions Network Germany, and as chair of the section Research in the German UNESCO Commission. And with this, I would like to hand over to her for the presentation, and I'm also looking forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this very kind and lengthy introduction. It's very nice of you to give such a comprehensive overview. Now, let me just share my screen before I start. It is really an honor to be with you here today. I hope you can see the full screen. Is that correct? Okay, great. And yeah, Alice, it's very nice that you mentioned Piran. It has been, yeah, it has been crazy 3 years really since then. And of course, you've been implementing the project over these years, which I imagine has been quite special also during Corona times. So I would love to hear and discuss how you managed this and how you had to adjust maybe some of the field research or change it to digital research. Of course, we've also had quite a few of these challenges, and I think it's maybe we can get a chance at the end to also exchange on questions of digital ethnography and methodology during Corona times. But yeah, thank you for the very kind introduction and invitation. I chose to speak on field stations and research vessels, basically arguing that both sides come with a very special texture, one could say, that has an impact on the research and especially also the social dynamics that unfold in these sites. And I invite you basically to one research station in northwest of Uzbekistan that we built up over a long period of time. It was run by the Center for Development Research for over 11 years. And I was heading the social science components in the last 6 years of that project. And second, I invite you onto the Meteor, which is one of Germany's research vessels. And I could join one of the expeditions in 2018, so again, quite a while ago. This is just to give you a bit of a background on the agricultural field station. It was built up with, one could say, German taxpayers' money, basically, in order to implement jointly with Urgench University, the University of Urgench, basically, which is a town in the northwest of Uzbekistan, in order to study the restructuring of land and water use. The project was very much designed in the spirit of post-Soviet Uzbekistan and the spirit of trying to find ways that the dying RC would basically not die, but water would still later on reach the RIC. That was actually a design flaw from the beginning, but the ambition was there. So a project, an interdisciplinary project aiming to study land and water management in the region. And for doing that, a research station was built up. We are here in a setting of Uzbekistan that had in 1990 become independent. The Soviet Union, of course, had fallen apart, and Uzbekistan was still very much in the late 1990s and early 2000s in a situation where this newly independent nation state was forming itself, was redrawing borders. We are, as mentioned, in the northwest of Uzbekistan. So basically, we are in a province called Khorasan province that borders with Turkmenistan, something that had been completely irrelevant, one could say, for many, many years. The whole irrigation system had been designed not thinking about these political borders much, but suddenly these political borders started to count again. We are in an irrigated agricultural setting in which cotton and wheat production was at that time still under a state plan. And that meant that it stood in clear contrast and competition with the rice production. And we are in a situation in which land had been privatized or semi-privatized, one should say. The former sovkhoz and kolkhoz had been divided into semi-private farms. But then in some of the later years of our project, within three sort of cycles, the land has been had been recollectivized again. So we are in a situation in which there's a lot of also fear in the air, a lot of hardship for local farmers. And we are in the time of Karimov, which is basically a time in which Uzbekistan experienced a very strong sort of post-Soviet authoritarian governance style. In 2005, the incident in Andijan happened, which basically was an incident in which the then Uzbek government opened a fire into a group of demonstrators, of students demonstrating, and killed, the numbers differ, but around 1,000 people. And after this, all other Western powers except of Germany were asked to leave the country. And why was Germany as the only Western country not asked to leave the country? Well, because of highest political level interactions and the aim to continue cooperation, which meant that it was possible for us as one of the very few projects financed by international partners to continue the project, but in an atmosphere in which fear and a lot of threats also to some of the partners we were working with very much shaped the culture and shaped the atmosphere in the project. We are also in a situation in which, or due to this atmosphere of fear, the agricultural research station became even more important. And this research station basically was the place where most of the research took place. But as said, I was heading the social sciences in the project in the past, or in the last sort of 6 years of the project. And of course, the social sciences were asked also by our reviewers of the last 2 phases, asked to assure that some of the earlier research would actually make sense in the local setting, would actually contribute to the local land and water management. And that meant that the social sciences, of course, had to do research outside of the research station, which created a lot of interesting dynamics. and also tensions in the project. And the second side is the research vessel. Here I joined in 2016. I said 18, well, 16 is already far long ago again. So I joined for a month and for a cruise along the coast of West Africa, mainly Mauritania and Senegal. It was a cruise with the research objective to study the Bank d'Arguin and the Sine Saloum. So basically the current along this coastline, and in order to understand the ecosystem and the influence also of the dust coming from the inside of the continent and affecting and contributing to the fertility of the waters in front of Mauritania and Senegal. So while it was actually along the coast of Mauritania and Senegal, we never saw the coasts. So I think that's also important. Visually, we were always in the open ocean, even though the difference, of course, when you enter onto the continental shelf is to be seen. I mean, you can see it, yeah, but we never saw the coast. And you see here the map of the transects that the ship had planned for the cruise, and all the sampling stations. Of course, then in reality, you have to adjust the planned transects a little, but just to give you an idea of where all of this was located. Also here we have quite an interdisciplinary mix, similarly to the research station that I introduced you before to. We have 28 researchers and 34 crew members. We have quite a good gender mix actually amongst the researchers, not so much amongst the crew members, but even there we had quite a few females, relatively speaking, 4 crews on research vessels on board. And we had a good disciplinary mix, largely, of course, the different natural science disciplines involved in marine sciences. So here, those covering the seafloor, those covering basically the water column, and even some covering the sea surface, the ocean surface. And myself as the sociologist, I had only 2 years earlier joined the Coastal and Tropical Marine Research Institute. I'm interested, it was mentioned by you, Ina Tesno, interested in the role of sciences and basically science studies, science and technology studies, knowledge sociology is one of my core fields. And when a spot opened up, I simply said, well, I'm very happy to join, and I'm happy to do all kinds of manual labor if I'm allowed to interview researchers and also interview the crew and basically document what is happening on board, document your knowledge practices and social interactions that can be observed. So that was the deal, so to say. And of course, as part of doing that type of research, I worked with a number of conceptual approaches, but as you can tell already from me narrating the case study selection, this was not one project design where I sort of selected one field station and then one research vessel, but it more sort of evolved over many years, and in a way it's a paper that emerged then out of the activities of different projects. So basically in both sides I did qualitative research, ethnographic research, but yeah, at different times inspired by a number of different theoretical approaches. If I look back at the two sides, I think one can draw a few similarities. And one of those is that I argue that they can be understood in many ways as places surrounded by non-places. We have the research vessel floating sort of in the middle of the ocean. It is in many ways a place surrounded by non-places. Having said that, we did have quite a stable internet connection, so there the argument sort of only holds to some degree. But you are here on, sorry, I can only half see my slide, so I just realized I'm talking about the research vessel, but you're seeing the research station. So similarly, the research station, you can very easily argue it's a place surrounded by non-places, because you have to cross a desert to get there. You are living in a research project guest house. You are driven every morning from the guest house together with your colleagues to the agricultural research station. In the evening, you are driven back. There's basically very, very little interaction with the outside world, except for these few social scientists who basically insisted to do the research outside. So you are very much grouped in this group of interdisciplinary researchers. There's a sense of remoteness. And you work basically 7 days a week during the time there in order to collect as much as you can in terms of data and samples. And of course, the collection of samples is very much shaped by the agricultural cycle. You have a strong sort of tendency of regroup discussion. You have these statements such as only the strong survive. In German, it's more like only the tough ones get into the garden. Nur die Harten kommen in den Garten. That's the German saying for those who speak German. So very commonly sort of, employed because yes, you do stay in rather rudimentary, very basic conditions. There is a very strong pressure to conform. Basically, the secretary of the project was the wife of the local security police, and only due to this, in many ways, we could actually implement this project for such a long time in that setting. And she is in very good contact with the lady who runs the guest house. So everyone, that whatever happens in the guest house also is known by the project, and this is communicated to you and everyone quite regularly. There's a very strong sense of general control throughout the time that you are there. Similarly, also on the ship, you have this, on one side, this adventurous spirit. Some of you might have joined a research cruise, so you know what I'm talking about. That you have the saying, what happens on the ship stays on the ship. That's the saying that you are greeted with when you hand over your passport when entering onto the vessel. You only get the passport back when you leave it again. But there's also a very strong performance pressure. Everyone who is actually joining, most people have been waiting for a long time to get the place. I could only join because someone else fell sick, basically. So many researchers have been waiting. It's costly. Everyone knows that it's very costly. It costs basically €1,000 a day per person. And you have a very structured every day. You work 24 hours, 7 days a week. So you have a shift work. People are asked to do, or you have to do a lot of physical labor, lots of activities we are not used to as researchers because of the responsibility. If something happens to the machinery, you are, as a researcher, the one who gives all the commands to the crane, for instance, operating the crane, operating the sampling stations. I, as a sociologist, never done this before, of course, had to do that simply because it has to be, if some of the machinery gets lost on the sea floor, it has to be with the responsibility of the researchers, not of the crew of the ship. So there is a regroup construction going on, but also an outgroup construction going on. So you have the thinkers and modelers versus the field researchers. You've got just as much as you have in the research station, so to say, the natural scientists versus the social scientists that might risk the overall endeavor. And you have, on both sides, you can argue that you have a construction of placelessness taking place. You have these sort of islands of research and of science that go hand in hand with substantial claims for universal value of what they're looking at. So here you have the us versus them construction, but also that us versus them construction affects or refers to the type of research that is taking place. You have also the field, again, the field versus the laboratory people, here referring to some of the discussions that we can also find with Livingstone and with Latour. What is also quite interesting with regard to the research vessel is that it's referred to as a research factory by some of the researchers. And in many ways, it is exactly that. You have an immense amount of samples being collected and being processed on a first level processing of processing. And what is, of course, here also important to mention is that you have sort of in many ways you could follow some of the things that you find, like you can implement a first level processing and then adjust your sampling strategy theoretically, like you find one of these whirlwinds going through the ocean, and you could theoretically follow it. But because of the immense performance pressure on the ship, it's very difficult for the teams to actually pull that through. No? There's a lot of competition, while on the one side you're asked to all contribute to one joint research question, and there's also strong interest in collaborating. You want to co-publish, you want to co-author papers, you want to sort of engage with the other teams in a constructive manner, but at the same time everyone competes over sampling stations, everyone competes over time basically to potentially adjust the sampling strategy, the transects that I showed you before, in order to make it work even more for your own research. And of course, you also compete over the laboratory equipment, but also here, interestingly, many of the groups actually said, well, some of the laboratory equipment on the ship is of higher quality than in the research stations themselves. So, you know, there's a lot of pressure also to make use of this equipment while you are on board. So maybe potentially even go beyond first level processing of the samples and do some of the first level analyses already. So you have this potential of just-in-time sampling, yeah, to basically adjust your sampling strategy, but the competition between the teams and the lack of time simply stands against this. You have a lot of discussions on method. You have these discussions out in the open on the ship, so everyone can listen in. There's a lot of discussion on that the quality of the research of the different sub-teams affects the quality of research of the overall team. Yeah, so you want to really bring in your expertise into the discussions of the other teams. There's a lot of discussion on what's the best method, and in many ways a reciprocal form of quality control. And this actually compares also to the field station, where you have also these best method discussions, where you also have sort of a spirit of joint quality assurance. But what is also special in the field station is that you have very because we are now in the setting of post-Soviet Uzbekistan, a very hierarchical, very authoritarian knowledge structure. I mentioned it already, the fear, an element of fear that it could, the elements in the project could risk the overall project. Many people depend on that project. There is not many other employment opportunities financed through international donors in the northwest of Uzbekistan at that time. But there's also all these stories of partners that have been working with Americans and ended up having to go to prison. Yeah, so a lot of fear. There's PhD students of mine that are accompanied by security police in the field. There's one PhD student that happens to eat potatoes that were covered in rat poison and nearly dies. Yeah? So effects, all these kind of experiences that build up a strong feeling of fear, and with this also of self-censorship. And it of course then inflicts also in many ways the freedom of thought, the freedom of critical thought. And there's a clear apoliticization of science taking place. Just to maybe sort of give you one anecdotal reference here, which to me was is one of the references I think back to quite regularly. At the end of this 11-year project, we organized an event with parliamentary representatives of the Uzbek parliament, and we rehearsed everything, and we're trying to be diplomatic in what we say. And I mean, basically it's a situation of complete mismanagement of natural resources, water and soil. We have, I might come on one of the slides, there might be a photo, it looks like snow, but it's all salt. So heavily saline soils, completely degraded. And we were trying to be very diplomatic. And at the end of the symposium, one of the parliamentarians came to me and said, well, exactly from you, we were hoping that you would actually speak up a bit more. So to sort of giving us an indication of how much we had already, self-censored, maybe not self-censored, but at least tuned down the language in a way that you can also ignore elements probably. Yeah. So that's, I think, for policy advisory activities, really for me, a lesson learned. How do you make your points in a friendly manner, but still in a sturdy manner? But it tells you a little bit about this apoliticization of research that can take place and took place in that field research station. You have I mentioned a seamless flow of information between the guest house and the office, and clearly a communicatively closed system, which contributes to this apoliticization. Everyone knows if someone had a guest visiting at the guest house, the lady who runs the guest house is going to make sure that doors are kept open, etc. And on the research vessel, you don't have this apoliticization of research taking place, but you have the physical elements of communication that you find a little less and less sexualized in the field research station, but on the research vessel, on this research vessel, there was definitely very strong sort of physical communication going on that also tipped into a sexualization of communications from time to time. Because it's a lot of physical manual labor, you have this element of, suddenly young male PhD students being the rising star. Some of the female postdocs were less the rising star, so to say, less able to show their physical strengths. You have a captain that takes photos. I'm quite interested in photography, so I sort of complimented, said, I would be interested in seeing your photos. He gives me a USB stick. I look at the photos. They're all photos of a naked woman. You have an IT guy who writes love letters to all kinds of female researchers on the vessel. You have professor who happens to not respect boundaries, physical boundaries, with a master student. So you have dynamics that unfold and are not surprising in such social conditions, I would say, but that give you an insight into how small such a research vessel can become. While you are, sort of have the widest horizon ever. You have these routinized practices that are built into to improve the spirits, but you have the coupling of immense performance pressure with quite a lot of alcohol being used. People are getting very tired. They work 24 hours, 7 shift work, physical labor that most of them are not used to, combined with then also some homesickness, I guess, and there are elements put up by the crew to overcome this, like a Bergfest, a party in the middle of the time, but also here clearly some elements where you would sort of say actually it's crossing boundaries. And with this, you see a constant negotiation of what is legitimate, in social and physical interactions. No? So what you can observe is here that on the one side you have sort of a construction of placelessness taking place, partly like in the field research station situation, because that enabled the project to continue being in that place. By saying we are here, but we are only in this agricultural research station, and we have our people under control, to put it in a simplified manner, that reduced risks. And in many ways, for those implementing the project in charge, the PIs, it also meant it reduced the risks of PhD students eating rat poison, of the risks of being treated in the hospital with needles that had been used before. And all these risks were reduced by creating an island and a protection against these risks. But at the same time, it also led to, in many ways, an apoliticization, or contributed further to an apoliticization of research. You had a strong tendency of assuring that the research is meeting international scientific standards, so a tendency to decontextualize, to compartmentalize in also a disciplinary manner, and to publish without taking this political context into account too much, or including it into analyses. And in a way, you found also on the research vessel this construction of epistemic authority through the reference to the laboratories, through the use of the technology in order to assure very systematic approaches to the transects, to the sampling. But at the same time, you also observe these social densification processes. You observe how the ship becomes closer and closer, how the performance pressure starts to interact with tiredness simply, and homesickness, and sort of tips into dynamics that are not apoliticizing the research, but are dividing the research teams in many ways. And with this then also undermining the interdisciplinary objective of the research. So the effects that this construction of islands has in both cases it differs. One, it's more apoliticizing, the other one where it's undermining the interdisciplinarity. But nevertheless, on a secondary level of effects, you can very much argue that the decontextualization of that type of research takes place in both cases, while in both cases we are looking at highly interdisciplinary research that aims at affecting and developing, so to say, solutions or innovations that can deal with environmental change problems and challenges of natural resource management. So it's aiming at system knowledge. In both cases, the aim is to contribute to interdisciplinary system knowledge that, of course, then has to be actually contextualized. Yeah, system knowledge is always contextualized, but through the construction of placelessness, we observe a decontextualization. And with this, I come to an end, and I thank you for your attention. I hope I did not I probably took too much time. I hope, well, I'm not sure what we had agreed, but I hope this is still fine. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Yes, thank you. That was perfect. And very interesting session. I think for sure we have many questions already. We will first give the word to our discussant today. I will briefly introduce her. Dr. Christelle Vanneau is a postdoctoral researcher at the Department of Political Science of the University of Vienna. She's also part of Empirical Data. And her work lies at the intersection of environmental politics, expertise, and international organizations. She has conducted extensive research on the United Nations Environmental Programme, UNEP, to understand its authority from the perspective of its experts' networks and careers. She specifically focuses on UNEP's expertise responding to areas affected by the global ecological crisis, armed conflicts, and disasters. Her involvement in Empirical Data now specifically addresses the conduct of ocean science, laboratory ethnography, and the study of science policy interrelations stemming from the VB&J treaties controversies. And with this, I'll hand over to Christelle and for some remarks, and maybe she wants to pick up on some points for discussion later on. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ina, for the brief introduction. I seem to have an unstable connection, so can I make sure first that you all hear me? Otherwise, I will just turn off my video. So feel free. So thank you, Anna, for this presentation. I found it extremely interesting. I have maybe because it was so clear, my guess is that there aren't necessarily a question about whether it was what was not comprehensible or not. So I would rather focus on maybe a couple of comments that came up as I was listening. And one comment is more also in relation to the chapter. I had a brief look with the chapter that was shared. So yes, maybe so this I will start with this. It's about the boundaries. So I have extensively engaged with the study of boundaries. At the very end of the doctoral research, I discovered this work also from Lamont and Molnar on how to study boundaries from a social science, broadly speaking, and it opened quite a bit of a ontological breakthrough in how you can perceive any of the spaces, the places you want to engage, and how to study politics and, so to speak, power dynamics, because any boundary effects is going to show consequences such as the one you portrayed, decontextualization, compartmentalization, apoliticization, and these are actually very difficult to demonstrate, to study, because they fall quite easily under a normative, like some kind of assessment, normative assessment of a situation. But the boundaries, well, because you can assess what's happening when you are on one side or the other side of the boundary, and because you can also assess what's happening when you are within a new boundary setting, those effects become visible. And I think that in the presentation, it confirmed a bit this question that I had with the chapter: what are the boundary effects? What are you showing us? What was silenced that your research provided a visibility, but also voices? And because in you know actor network theory and translation studies, it's so much important to know who are the so in French is a porte-parole, who is able to raise the voice of non-human or of others. So the scientist, and in there again, I could see that both cases were very interesting to engage with those boundary effects. So that was a bit the first big, like more analytical, but also empirical question was, okay, you have two cases, not necessarily easy to compare. And you did an incredible job at providing analytical, you know, concept or commonalities, similarities, but also the differences in order to provide a comparison, a justification. So here, two questions is, what are the boundary effects? What was made visible? And the second is, I felt that in the presentation, the comparison was it built after, you know, afterward? And if so, how can you avoid that? The epistemic critique of, okay, are they really comparable? And the reason I ask this question is because I see, so in the research I conducted, I met laboratories in conflict, armed conflict. So you have those laboratories that are asked by the UN to send, you know, portable laboratories, or so to say, it's taking the laboratory outside its space to go and do those sampling, but with a very already policy-driven reason. And I gave up on comparing, you know, laboratory work when they were too different, and yet it's the same object we try to study. So here maybe the question is more based on your experience on how you could build, you know, a comparison between those two cases, like maybe a couple of advice or a couple of suggestion would be great. Thirdly, I think there's another theme that I found very interesting, is the authority, about the authority, because with laboratory studies we open science, the black box of science, and there the epistemic authority, how it is contested, becomes what we can study in depth. Yet from the thick description of social dynamics, of also epistemic procedures or processes, I was wondering if in both cases you were able to engage with this black box of science through procedures that you could compare. I'm going to take an example. It's so in the laboratory we explored. We for the manifold data, we have this possibility to say how do they produce image in the sea, and how do they include this in the chain of science making. And I was wondering if producing producing this chain of science was something that could be comparable, like in the field station for agricultural, from the research question to having a result, having something to say, like we demonstrated this or we published this. So this was a bit the second comment, because what I find interesting there is that at each stage it's contested, and it's both all over the place, but at some point you want to do something with all this contestation in order to communicate something. And last but not least, I would say it's about those heterotopian places. And here, for the field station, I could not help but, so I have this background more in studying humanitarian and affairs and missions. And because it was a development project in Uzbekistan, I could see this like what happens when they go on mission and they have those stations, where they produce a lot of knowledge. So it's not laboratory per se, but in some development or a project. And I had seen this in a project in Afghanistan, because they were staying at the same station and it was remote and everything. Somehow the mission they were conducting was very similar to a laboratory. And I was wondering if you had any parallel with this, because you also are working in a development, so you are familiar with this kind of projects. Yes, so the laboratory sense in conflict context, I talked about this. And last question, also related to those heterotopian places, is what do you have, like, did you engage the discussion with the researchers to understand what they are looking for in those places or in those non-places? Why do they go there? And here I read I engaged a bit with also the research that are conducted in Antarctic or this kind of places, because this, of course, the adventurers, you mentioned it already, but I was wondering if there was something about there that was to produce, in order to produce science, you need to produce normal science. You need to withdraw from normal science to feel that you are going, if you are not doing a discovery, at least you're doing under specific conditions that are exceptional. You're counting the big science, the one with the big S. So I was wondering if you had also this outlook from researchers. What are they looking in those non places? Thank you again so much for your presentation, and I look forward to your answers.
Thank you. Can I respond directly?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for these different comments. I try to sort of reply. I don't think I can reply to all of them, but I will try to respond as much as I can.
You can choose the one you like.
Yeah. What are the boundary effects, and what was silenced? What became more visible and less visible? I mean, in the Uzbek case, what was supposed to get a voice through that project was the land and water management. Now, having said that, I would say that this only worked to some degree, because I mean, this land and water, the situation, I mean, the degraded natural resources at hand are degraded because of management issues. Yeah? And the apoliticization of it, of the research, of course, meant that exactly this this management drama, could say, it was addressed, but it wasn't addressed to the degree that it probably, well, that it has to. It has to be addressed. And in many ways, this anecdote of this interaction with the members of parliament indicates also that. At the same time, you could also argue that because of this construction of placelessness and the construction of the island, the local actors and the local challenges, of course, also to deal with a post-Soviet transformational process, where silenced to a large degree. One example, maybe the project was asked because it was actually a development research project. It was financed by the German Research Ministry, but clearly with a developmental focus. So with an aim to develop innovations, also institutional innovations that would basically improve land and water management. No, I mean, in a simplified manner. And as part of this, from the second phase onwards, it was asked to take an explicit stand on its gender approach because of the mainstreaming of the topic of gender at that time. And these then male colleagues of writing at that time, basically, or writing this second phase proposal, decided to explicitly state that the project is taking a gender neutral approach. That was their answer. Yeah, and by taking this so-called gender neutral approach, they, in the end, ended up working mainly with male farmers and water users. Why? Because, you know, they were supposed to later on reach big hectares. Yeah, I mean, the whole scaling up issue meant that they would work with large farmers, and they are the cotton and wheat farmers. The vegetable agriculture and the fruit tree agriculture is purely in female hands. But these female small-scale agriculturalists basically no longer played an explicit role in that project and could benefit substantially less, which has quite an effect of when you're in a water-scarce year and there's a general rule that you have to irrigate cotton first, but there's also some local practices that you would still redirect some water for vegetable farming. But of course, if a project ends up focusing on large-scale hectares only, there is clear silencing of female agriculture. Yeah. And I mean, we raised these topics. Yeah, we put a PhD on the whole question of genderedness in the project. I think that was very useful. It was also later on evaluated very positively. But I mean, you have sort of many examples like this where certain local actors became more visible and suddenly could also very much benefit from the project, while others were basically further marginalized. On the Meteor, I mean, you know, to be honest, it really, for me, was an experience. I would go on a research vessel immediately again. I would do it again immediately, but it was, I had completely underestimated the social dynamics of a research vessel. And I also don't want to say that just judging from this one experience, I should judge, you know, all other experiences would be the same. But it definitely, I experienced it as a very sexualized space, to be very honest. And not sexualized only in the sort of, you know, positive life experiencing, adventurous and way, but in a very negative sexualizing manner, and in many ways that you know, out of sort of a modernity and what's the lower side of modernity perspective, that of course fits many other descriptions of the other side of modernization, basically. Are they comparable? No, I don't think they're comparable, and I wouldn't actually say that I'm strictly comparing. That would be, you know, too much of a construction. What I'm trying to do, there is a paper on this, but I haven't. It's been lying in the drawer, nearly ready since quite a while now. So I hope that will still come out. But what I try to do is to bring these two cases in close dialogue with each other, and basically draw insights and learnings from both that do speak to each other, I would argue. But if you ask me, are they comparable? No, it's not a comparative study. No, and it's exactly as you observed it. I mean, I was in this Uzbekistan project for many years. Later on, I happened to be on the ship. There was no joint planning for this as one project. There was no checking on whether these cases are comparable, etc. And also with the chain of sampling, for instance, on the ship, for instance, I documented the different chains of sampling and the first level processing, so the micro practices. These micro practices I never documented in that detail in the research station. Yeah, I was part of some of the sampling exercises. I did some of the sampling as well, but I never documented it as thoroughly as, for instance, on the ship. So maybe just this for now. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much. This is already a very interesting start, and I would like to open up the floor if any of you have other comments or questions to the presentation, or would like to raise other points, or maybe also share your experiences, then this is the time. Otherwise, I also have some questions. Maybe Alice can start.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna-Katharina. I think this was very interesting. The first thing is my experiences in doing ethnography is mainly in the multilateral negotiation context. And still, some of the issues that you raised, I can also observe in this context. And I was wondering, you have multilateral negotiations. In a way, there is also some element of placelessness, And I was wondering why. And maybe there is a temporal dimension to it. So people knowing there is an end to it, and also the fact that there are, in a way, no routines. So people coming together, they are all outside of their day-to-day practices and routines, joining a specific endeavor. And I'm wondering if these settings are then more likely to, to include some kind of these effects that you said, sexual harassment and so on, because I know plenty of stories of female ethnographers in conferences that were, object of sexual harassment. And we are now publishing a book very soon on how to conduct this kind of research. And we all supervisors, we all agree that it's very important to talk about these issues. And so I was wondering, is there a temporal dimension that makes these places placelessness, because people know it has an end, so that was one question I had, or one thought. The same with scientific conferences, I mean, people tend to, also, drink, and, it's outside of their day-to-day routines, and it's a form of liberation, and things can go positive, because you can be inspired, but things can also go wrong in a way. Then also in the BBNJ context, in the negotiation context, there is also a sense of apoliticization. And I have observed this with my PhD students, for instance. They do excellent work, but the more they get into it, the less they want to raise critical voices. And not a critique, not at all, But, I like, okay, let's be critical. And it's like, no, we don't want to intervene with the process. So we had this discussion, should we publish a blog? What do we say in the blog? There was some reluctance. No, we shouldn't raise this issue because, we should rather be supportive of the dynamic. NGOs also don't want to be too critical at this stage because, we see compromise. So I feel that also in this context, we as researchers, because I don't know why, is it because we become so much part of the community? I mean, as an ethnographer, you study a community and you are participant observer, you participate, and you have some kind of a desire also that things go well in the end, So is this also why apoliticization happens? Yeah, at least in our case, I could see some of this kind of identification with the process. You don't want to be critical because you live with the people and you see how many efforts they actually do to make the whole thing work. Yeah, and you don't want to be the troublemaker in the end. And the last point, I think, on the digital aspect that you mentioned, because we had to switch to digital ethnography, and that's completely different. And I think in digital ethnography, you are sitting in your safe place at home, so maybe some of these things actually, you will not be able to sense these dynamics at all, I suppose. Yeah. So I think that's it for all, but really interesting. And yeah, thank you very much for sharing. I mean, I think the fact that you shared the emails from this guy, this is really, I think people should do this more often, because these things also happen to me and other colleagues, and we just don't say anything, especially as young female researchers or early career researchers. You do not want to be the troublemaker. So I think it's really important that there are role models pointing to these things and making that visible.
Yeah, thank you, Alice. I find it very, very difficult, this whole topic of how to talk about abuse, basically. Yeah, I mean, there wasn't actually physical abuse in the end happening, but there were definite boundary crossings, and also, professor basically starting to touch a master student. I mean, where there is power imbalances, and it's definitely no-go. And I think on that trip, what encouraged me to basically speak up was simply the fact that I realized if I don't, I was a permanent professor already. Yeah? If I don't speak up, how can I expect any of the master students to speak up? Yeah? So in many ways, that for me created a situation where it was clear I just had to sort of break this spell of silence. And once I had, actually, it was very interesting, because once I had, others started speaking up, and also males started basically approaching some of the other males and saying, here, this is not okay. So in many ways, to me, that was very positive. But I mean, you can imagine I was not only popular later on with everyone. Yeah? So nevertheless, actually with all those who really mattered, they could all understand where I was coming from later on, and accepted it. Yeah. And in a way, actually, I think in a way, for some people, it strengthened my authority later on. I mean, there was an element of respect also paid towards speaking out.
Can I, sorry to interrupt you? Because I think this is really important. We, we are doing the oral history of science interviews, and that's mainly how we get knowledge and data on what happens on the vessels. And Verena Tunicliffe, she's one of the most famous ocean scientists. She discovered the hydrothermal vents, and she is now over 70. And I interviewed her, and she said she was on a cruise, the first ever female PI, only men, a crew 50 men, and a chef, so a cook, that refused to cook for her. Yeah, and she said that it was, I mean, she didn't say it, but she said, like, you had just to let it be, So she also took part with the drinking, and she just said you had to go through this. Yeah, and so I think this is part of ocean science. I mean, it's part of its history, this kind of abuses and the difficulty of females to actually have their place on the vessel.
Yeah, exactly. It is part of it, but it's not right. And I mean, I find it quite interesting, because in the at least for the German companies that run these research vessels, they have received a lot of pressure to employ female captains, and this has helped, and the pressure was basically built up by female marine scientists, and female marine scientists that are partly now heading research institutes. Yeah, so I find that also really interesting, how sort of in the value chain of knowledge production, to put it, I mean, that's a horrible term, but yeah, if you think about how decisions on how we shape the institutional landscape of science will then also again have an impact on the cultures of science that take place in or unfold in different settings. So not at all surprising, but you know, important to remind us of again and again and again. And also with your point on the temporalness and yeah, these heterotopian spaces. No, I definitely agree. I mean, there's this scientific conferences generally, also multilateral negotiations, multilateral settings. There is an element of the excitement of meeting other people, being united by a joint agenda. And also the possibility to, for a moment, put your hierarchical differences aside, while then very quickly being reminded of them as well and employing them as well again. Yeah? So there is definitely an element of a circus there. And in many ways, I would say that's something very positive. Yeah? It's also very invigorating and empowering and motivating and also sort of uniting. I mean, this we group construction is something very positive, yeah, of saying, well, we are all here because we want to save the ocean. We are all here because we want to save the world, so to say, and not at all in a ridiculing manner. I think that is a very, very important element of it. But yeah, it again has also sort of its downside, and we need to reflect on these downsides and yeah, just document them the way you do. I mean, this is fantastic work that you're doing. The apoliticization, I think we do because as you say, we identify with it and it becomes our own. And in many ways, I think it makes us sometimes question the methodological stance that say we want to cooperate on equal eye level, we want to do participant observation, we want to be part of it. Yes, that is all true, but how do we maneuver the boundary between being part of it and being distanced enough in order to still, yeah, simply distance ourselves to the degree that we can still see the pattern emerging and see the critical points also sort of crystallizing. And of course, on this element of being critical, I mean, the institute I'm heading is an institute that does a lot of research and a lot of research-based policy advice, and quite high-level policy advice, because it's basically part of our mandate to advise the external policy fields of Germany and a number of UN organizations. And there we always have this sort of tension between making our points, but making them in a way that they can be heard. And to me, what is by now really crucial is to think about trust being a substantial currency of that being critical. Yeah, you need to build relationships with actors that don't see you as a policy advisory person, but as a critical friend. Yeah, that want to be pushed, that are interested in sort of thinking about their subject matter out of different perspectives. And I quite like the concept of epistemic friendships there, because it helps us to think about, I mean, to also invest into this mutual trust that enables you to say what you need to say and still be heard. By basically investing into relationships. And you can't invest into that relationship with everyone, but we know after a while where there are entry points and where there aren't. So this, I would always encourage, I encourage myself and my PhD students to somehow find a way of meandering between an in-group and being part of the whole thing and an out-group perspective.
Thank you. Very interesting. Do we have other comments or questions from the audience? You can also post in the chat, or you can also, if you don't want to be identified, because this is recorded, you can also chat to me privately and I will ask the question. In the meantime, I also have a question, because our research also goes into another dimension. So you mentioned the vessels, you mentioned the field stations, but have you also been in touch with some of the digital aspects? So we're looking into marine science, but some of the marine science does no longer require necessarily the traditional ways of conducting marine science. So how have you experienced the digital spaces and also the digital ways of conducting research?
Yeah, thanks. In many ways, one PhD student and a postdoc of one of my projects would be much better suited in outlining this. They look at some of the float, like data collection through floats and automatic processing, or at least the automatic sending back to the models, etc. Within the field of CO2 measurements, marine CO2 measuring, where on the ship, basically, there was also a digital, the seafloor was basically mapped, and the constant mapping of the seafloor, it's a continuous process and is already outdated sort of just briefly after you've mapped it. So there's a constant movement to it. And similarly, we also collected air samples that would then also be automatically transmitted, mainly air samples for the German weather service. So basically, sending sort of balloons up into the air, but then they take in these balloons are measuring devices, and then they take measurements on the different air levels, basically, and temperatures, and send it automatically back. But we also took air samples that collected basically dust from the air, and then we later on had to send the data back actually manually, but through digital means. So digitalization was a topic and was definitely there, but I didn't work on it. What we are now looking at in this marine CO2 measurement project is more the system that has been put in place in order to conduct marine CO2 measurements globally, while it's not global, and it's maintained by very few institutions, financed by few countries. So there's an imbalance basically in the agenda setting happening. We also have issues with data integration, all of that, where you see a lot of contestation, negotiation happening, but also in a very, also that has to be really mentioned and admired, in a very cooperative spirit, and also in a very internationally cooperative spirit across boundaries, where sort of out of a geopolitical perspective, you see a hardening of political borders, but also there, science taking on a role as a third player, you could argue, where cooperation is continued, not only still possible, but actually continued, despite geopolitical rising or increasing geopolitical differences.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments at this stage? I had another question. Why do you have to give your passports when you enter the ship? Completely honest. Fine.
The idea is that you have the whole box of passports basically in one box, and in the case of emergency, there's one person in the crew responsible of taking that box, rather than imagining that all 60 people think of their passport. Basically, that's sort of the reasoning behind. But nevertheless, it adds to this spirit of what happens on the ship stays on the ship, and yeah, you're part of one control network in a way.
I see. Alice?
Yeah, maybe just on the issue of trust, I think that this is a very important point, and it's becoming increasingly important when you talk about, the science policy interrelation. And it's also something that I experienced when we started with Maripol data. I wanted to engage with the Austrian negotiators, and at the beginning there was a lot of suspicion. And so we had regular workshops, we presented our work, and I felt that only after 3 years we could have a meeting where I felt, okay, now this is a really open discussion, yeah, where things were shared that, you would normally not hear from diplomats.
Yeah.
I totally agree that it takes time, and it's a very personal thing. And that's, I think, why it's so difficult to turn into instruments or tools that anyone can apply, because it's such a personal thing.
Yeah. And it comes with a responsibility that, sometimes I do wonder whether that responsibility starts restricting ourselves and our thinking. But I guess we always have the tool of posing questions, and basically sort of continuing by posing questions rather than by immediately formulating a critical stand, sort of, that can be misunderstood maybe as well. There's one more hand, Nirmala.
Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. But it's late. It's very late here in Indonesia. I'm from Jakarta. Hi, everyone. Actually, I have joined few webinars from Maripol Data, and I'm basically doing my PhD in the first semester, and my topic is on autonomous. So that's interested to join each and every topics related to maritime law, ocean law, and though I know this is very specific about the field professor or research. I'm interested and would like to know about this. So I would like to know also if any of you have conducted any research will relate to the autonomous vessel, to be specific, though I know it's comparatively new topic. Not too many research have been conducted on this topic, but in case like any of you have any, for example, like information or know anybody or any institution or any research center have been doing or have concentration on autonomous vessel, I would be very happy, because I'm doing PhD at the University of Indonesia, and being the largest archipelagic nation in the world, yet we're not a maritime country, we can say, like not world. Like but it's my my own perspective, because my country always say like, okay, we are the great the largest archipelagic nation, we are a maritime country, but I disagree with that. So I'm actually currently looking for co-supervisor from outside my university. So I plan to have a co-supervisor from outside, because our university has given the permission to have a co-supervisor out of the university, external supervisor, I mean, external supervisor. So in case like any of you know, or Professor Anna knows, so I would really appreciate. Thank you so much. And I would like to be counted if you have any seminars or conference which relate to maritime or even ocean governance. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Nirmala. It's very nice to hear that someone is dialing in from Universitas Indonesia. It must be late, yeah? +6 hours if I'm not mistaken. So yeah, thanks for joining. I've never worked on autonomous vessels. It sounds like a very exciting topic. One of my PhD students, Irina Rafliana, is also from Indonesia, while she's from Lipi, actually. BRIM, I understand it's called now. So maybe you know her, but she works on tsunami early warning. So very different topic, but still marine. It's just to mention, of course, Indonesia, it's a very big society, but I realize that the institutions are well connected, UI and Lipi, if I'm not mistaken. So that's unfortunately all I have to offer at the moment. I apologize. But, yeah.
I mean,
thank you so much.
The University of Malmö, the World Maritime University, maybe they can also give some advice. I think they have a very big network, they must know.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah. Thank you.
Perfect. If there are no last minute pressuring questions or comments, we would like to thank our presenter, Professor Hornidge, today, and also our discussant, Dr. Christelle Renaud, and of course Alice, for the hosting of these seminars. And we will give you a quick outlook of what's coming next. So we have upcoming already next week, we have the next seminar, which is on science diplomacy, marine biodiversity negotiations. So again, on the BBNJ negotiations perspectives from the South, and we invited Andrei Polizhuk, who just recently finished his PhD in this topic, but has already worked as a diplomat for Brazil before, so interestingly connecting the science policy interface in this regard. And we also, so this is next Wednesday at the same time, and in the framework of the lecture series of this department from our university here, we have, for those of you speaking German and are here, 2 sessions upcoming that are at the University of Vienna. So one on water and gender, and one which is in German über die notwendige Unmöglichkeit einer transfeministischen Methodologie. And then as part of the ocean seminars, we have invited Lisa Levin in January, so the first session next year, on climate change and the deep sea, science policy perspectives. So she's going to talk about this interconnection, and also probably giving some insights of her engagement with the COP or also deep sea mining and very recent issues in this regard. And with this, I would like to thank you again and hand over to Alice for the last thank you and goodbye words. See you next time.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ina, for organizing this session and for this excellent moderation. Thank you, Christelle. Thank you, Anna Katharina. And I hope we see each other again at one point, maybe physically, to get into a deeper discussion on these issues. I wish you all a lovely evening and see you at our next session.
Thank you.